what do? I just run my mouth. Every time. It's just like not my thing. You know, I like to call him a shadow daddy, if you know what I'm saying. Well, hello friends, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you are new here. My name is Lori Beth, and today we are going over my March reading wrap up. So all of the books that I read in March, I believe it was 8 books total, which was a really good reading month for me. That was higher than I normally do. I'm gonna go ahead and say I was #blessed in March. I don't know what happened, but I was devouring books left and right. They were all just hitting home. Like it was vibes. There was books and there was vibes, and that is all I can ever ask for in a reading month. So with that being said, we have quite a few to go over today, so we are gonna go ahead and jump right in. And the first book that I read in the month of March was Foxglove by Adeline Grace. This was a 4-star read for me, and this is the second book in the Belladonna series, or I don't actually know what the name of the series is, but it is, at least at this point in time, going to be a 3-book series, and this is book 2. If you are not aware of what the series is about, we follow our main character, whose name is Signa Farrow. She has a very special ability to be able to communicate and see death, and death as in death is a person or a shadow, if you will. Like, I like to call him a shadow daddy, if you know what I'm saying. But she develops a relationship with Death himself in book 1, and also becomes very close with her cousins in book 1 as well. The first book was really, really good. It is a very gothic infused setting. So if you like Bridgerton mixed with like gothic vibes, this is such a cool story to read. And it was a murder mystery setting as well in the first book. And in book 2, there was another murder mystery, but there was an introduction of another character whose name was Fate, and he just so happens to be the brother of Death. That created a very cool dynamic in the story. So there was the murder mystery again, there was Fate that came in and kind of started to push Signa around and push the relationships that she was building with Death and now her cousin as well into areas that she was kind of uncomfortable with and had to learn how to fight through and kind of fight for the things that she really loved. If you've read Belladonna, the first book, she came from a place of never really having friends or family for long periods of time because everybody around her just seemed to end up croaking and kicking the bucket. So she never had a chance to really get involved and build relationships with people. So now in book 2, she has these relationships established, and she is really tested on what those relationships will be able to survive and be pushed through with kind of like this diabolical foe that comes into play. Again, if you really like a gothic setting, this is such a atmospheric book, and the descriptions of everything are so, I like to say it's like an earthy gothic vibe. So we have like these beautiful estates out in the middle of nowhere that are covered in poisonous flowers like belladonna and foxglove, but there's also that introduction of the murder mystery and death just being a part of the story as well, which gives it kind of like that balance of like life and death, and it's just like perfectly gothic and perfectly beautiful. Highly recommend. And the next book that I read in March was An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. If you know me, you know that I am an S.T. Gibson fan through and through. Her book, A Dowry of Blood, completely changed my brain chemistry as a reader, and I cannot recommend that book enough. So this was a 3.75-star read for me. I am using my Storygraph app, so I can do half and quarter ratings on that app, which is something I absolutely love about that, because things are not always black and white when it comes to reading books for me. I can't just always give a book like a 3 and call it a day. This was a 3.75-star read for me. If you are not aware, this book follows a main character named Laura who grows up in a small southern town and decides to attend an all-girls college on the East Coast. When she gets to this college, she's kind of she has her eyes open to what it's like to be in the real world and out of her little bubble of her southern comfort, and be in an academic setting where there are other very smart women and very competitive women at that. She is very talented and ends up in this poetry program where she very quickly starts to kind of fawn over her poetry professor, but more than that, fawns over another student whose name is Carmilla. This is like a Carmilla retelling, so Carmilla the vampire, and that's what this book kind of surrounds. Turns out the poetry professor in this book has started a relationship with Carmilla herself, but it's nothing untoward, if you will. Like, nothing ever goes sexual between them, but it's definitely a very close and intimate relationship, and she starts to bring Carmilla into her world, and then eventually turns Carmilla into a vampire. Carmilla and Laura end up building this beautiful relationship with each other, and in my opinion, it was a very cool relationship because Carmilla in the beginning of the book comes off as this like cutthroat, super competitive, like first in the class girl, and Laura is this young woman who is stepping out of her comfort zone of that bubble of where she grew up and trying to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. And the dynamics start to kind of shift about halfway through the book, where Laura becomes like the driving force behind the relationship and the strong one in the relationship, someone that Carmilla can actually lean on. And even though Carmilla has gone through this big change in her life, which will now be a very long life, Laura is kind of the reasoning behind her. If you've read anything by S.T. Gibson, you know that her writing style is poetic in general, so I loved this academic setting coming from S.T. Gibson. It just seemed really natural. It flowed really well. I did not love that the story kind of seemed to blend almost like a YA feel with adult situations and adult topics. I felt like it needed to be, like the writing style itself needed to be a little bit more on an adult level to kind of just like bring together the entire story. So the book gets spicy towards like the middle, like 3/4 mark, and I think it seemed like I knew it was going to go there, but the writing up until then did not support the spice that ended up coming out of it, if that makes sense. Either way, I still really, really enjoyed it. It was not my favorite read by her. However, if you do like a dark academia setting, if you like a vampire vibe, this is such a good story and kind of a beautiful sapphic romance. So I will say that the romance itself was very beautiful, and I really enjoyed the relationship between Laura and Carmilla. And next up in the month of March, I read A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This is a Norse-inspired fantasy story, and I think I want to say I rated this one like 3.5 stars. This follows our main character, whose name is Freya, who lives in this Nordic world of Jarls, which are basically like rulers of different parts of the land, and out of these Jarls, one of them becomes king. It is discovered that Freya has a drop of goddess blood that will allow her to fulfill this prophecy for one of the Jarls to get him on the throne. She is forced into this marriage with him, and so ensues the story of her really just being treated like this object throughout the entire story. Not necessarily terribly, but they treat her like something that is basically just to be used to get this Jarl on the throne. And along the way, she starts to develop a relationship with the Jarl's son, Bjorn, and out of that becomes kind of like this enemies to lovers romance between the two of them. I did really like the Nordic setting of this book. It was atmospheric, and I really liked that. So you're talking on the ocean and Viking type boats and ships and people, the way that they are described and the way they dress and the way they drink and dance. It was all very atmospheric, and I really liked that. And I liked the idea of certain characters in this book having a drop of blood, either from a god or a goddess, and then them having power from whichever god or goddess that was. It was very battle heavy, which is not necessarily my favorite, so I don't hate it. And I didn't hate it because this is a fantasy novel with a romance, like a heavy romance subplot. But I'm not super into a ton of fighting and a ton of battles. We're talking like heavy battles where it felt like almost every chapter or every other chapter, something was happening. Someone was getting their head cut off. Someone was sword fighting. Someone was fighting the dead. It just felt very, very heavy on the battle scenes for me. So that's not my cup of tea when it comes to fantasy. Again, that's subjective. So if you do like more of a true fantasy battle kind of plot with maybe a romance subplot. It's not a subplot though. Like the romance is like decently heavy in the book. So it's almost like 50-50. But that's why I rated it 3.5 stars, because it was just like, I kind of got tired of all the fighting. It's just like not my thing, you know? But I liked the story. I liked Freya as a character. I thought she was pretty darn strong for always having to be forced into situations she doesn't want anything to do with. She's kind of talked about in a room like she doesn't even exist. So she was really good at kind of standing her ground and standing up for herself when the opportunity arose. So I did really like that. And I had never read a Nordic mythology book before, so I really liked that part as well. So 3.5 stars for me. Again, if you like more fighting and battle scenes in your fantasy, this might be a good one for you to pick up and read. And next on my list, I read The Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. This was actually an ARC that I received from NetGalley, so thank you NetGalley for the advanced copy of this book. And it was also one that I read in a vlog, which I will link down below as well. This is a literary fiction novel, and I rated this 4 stars when I read it. It starts off with following a group of 4 sisters, and one of the sisters early in the story ends up passing away, and then it follows what ensues after these 3 sisters lose someone very, very close to them, and how their relationships kind of revolve around each other, and the issues that they all have within themselves. It was a very good display of family drama that felt very realistic. Trigger warnings for this book. There are some heavy usages of drugs and alcohol. There's also a little bit of talk of sexual consent and sexual abuse. And one of the sisters does spend her career as a fighter, so there's talk about fighting in the book as well. I don't know if that's a trigger warning for anybody, but just throwing that out there just in case. But again, I thought that this was a very realistic story or display of a family drama because these sisters grew up in a home that a lot of us maybe have dealt with or know someone that has dealt with a home life that was not necessarily the most warm and loving. One of the parents deals with alcohol abuse, and then also the dynamic of having a family setting where the parents are almost disconnected. And the sisters developed their own hierarchy within each other and taking care of and caring for each other as they were growing up. The oldest sister in the story ends up feeling like the caretaker of all of them, and so ensues her own issues as she becomes an adult woman as well. She's dealing with struggles in her own marriage. The other 2 sisters have split off and they're doing their own careers, and they deal with their own issues from their childhood and the loss of their sister. I thought it was just a really, really gut-wrenching and simultaneously heartwarming story about what loss and grief can do to you individually, but also to the dynamic of a family and how you can truly count on the people around you to help you get through certain situations, and that you should be able to find people in your life that help you get through those situations. It was also really cool to see from an individual dynamic what each character needed to work on to improve themselves. So I thought it was a really good balance between just a group and then also from the sisters as well individually. It was multiple POV, so going back and forth between them was really interesting to see from their side how they were dealing with the loss and the grief, and then also how they felt about the other sisters in the family. It ended up ending in such a lovely way. It just became a very well-rounded story for me, and I struggle sometimes with literary fiction because of that. They do tend to get kind of draggy in the middle and boring for me, but this one really did hold my attention most of the time, and I really appreciated that. So if you like literary fiction or if you like a family drama, I would highly recommend this book when it comes out. And up next on the list is A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. This was a 4.25 star rating for me, and also part of that same vlog that I just mentioned, which will be linked down below. So if you want to see more detail about this book, you can always reference that vlog. I am not going to go too many spoilers in this video because I know this is an ongoing series that a lot of people haven't finished. And with that being said, this is the last book in the 3-book series. We follow our main character, Evangeline Fox, through all sorts of adventures in the Great North, where she has started as this little meek and mild woman who had her heart broken and makes a deal with one of the faiths named Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts. And she goes on all of these adventures with Jax and meets all of these different characters throughout the stories, some of them good, some of them bad. And along the way, she develops into this lovely young woman who finally learns how to make decisions, stand up for herself, and fight for what she truly wants, which is love at the end of the day. I have done a few reviews on this series in the past, so again, I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but I am telling you what, if you love a fairy tale story, Stephanie Garber is like top notch when it comes to transferring you into a beautiful world that you could only imagine in your dreams. It is full of beautiful characters, beautiful scenery, castles. I don't know, you name it, it's in a Stephanie Garber book. She has this way of just like totally sucking you into this world that almost makes you feel like a fairy tale that you would read when you were little, but also on an adult level. And it's, I don't know, it's like that she does something to my brain. And the slow burn romance that she can build in these stories, like there is no one on par with her when it comes to that. Like if you like a slow burn, if you love love, if you love beautiful fairy tale stories, this series is definitely for you. I highly recommend it. I can't stop talking about it. I feel like I talk about it all the time, and I've posted like 8,000 photos of it on my Bookstagram, and they've been featured in so many videos of mine already. Again, I say I'm not going to go into too much detail, and here I go. What do? I just run my mouth every time I do it. But again, if that is something that you find yourself really liking in a fantasy book, if you like to just get lost in something, this series is such a good series to fall into. And next, I moved on to Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This was a 4.25 star rating for me, and a book that took me completely by surprise in the month of March. So in this story, we follow our main character, whose name is Xing Yin, and she is the daughter of the moon goddess. She grows up very secluded on the moon with just her mother and her mother's attendant for company. As Xing Yin grows into becoming a young woman, she also starts to grow into her magic as an immortal, and her aura becomes discovered by the Empress of the Celestial Kingdom. What Xing Yin doesn't know is that her mother was actually secluded on the moon as a punishment for stealing the elixir of immortality, which is how she even became an immortal in the first place. And so no one knows that Xing Yin even exists. Because of this, her mother tells her to flee from the moon and find solace somewhere in the Celestial Kingdom. And as she does this, she basically flees there, not knowing anybody and knowing where to go or what to do, and kind of stumbles her way into becoming friends with the Prince of the Celestial Kingdom. As she develops this relationship with the prince, he takes her on as kind of like a study partner, and they get to spend years studying the history of the Celestial Kingdom, the history of where they came from, and also the art of battle as well. She soon discovers that she is a very talented archer, which is the history of her father, and kind of uses that to find her place in the world. So as Xing Yin becomes a much more skilled archer, she discovers that you can garner the attention of the Celestial Emperor and get a favor from him through some sort of act of bravery or service. She then becomes part of the Celestial Army, where she continuously battles different creatures and monsters and people throughout the realm, all in hopes of trying to get a favor from the king and get her mother released from the moon. This story was just so poetic and beautifully written. I felt almost like I was reading not just a fiction novel, but like a history novel and mythology all mixed into one, with elements of fantasy involved that just made it all like this perfect blend of everything. So you had that Chinese mythology narrative of the book, but then you also had Xing Yin fighting like sea monsters and fighting the undead and people from different realms. There was magic, there was romance, and there was this lovely female main character who went from this very secluded, naive state of mind and literally fighting in an army for the thing that she loves the most, which was her mother. It was just a beautiful story of everything. I didn't expect to fall so deeply in love with Xing Yin as a character and the atmosphere of the book as well. So if you like a mythology or a retelling type of book, but you haven't checked this one out, I highly recommend reading this one. And then next was one of my most anticipated reads for the year, Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Again, if you have been around for a minute, you know how I feel about Ali Hazelwood. She can basically do no wrong in my eyes. And this was her first step into a paranormal romance setting. If you have read Ali Hazelwood in the past, you know that she typically writes a more contemporary romance novel. However, she does have a very long history of writing paranormal and fantasy fan fiction, but this was her first published work in that genre. This was also a 4.25 star read for me. Not necessarily my favorite read that I've ever read by her, but I did really like the paranormal setting. So in the story, we follow our main character, whose name is Misery Lark, and she is a vampire who has been living this very low-key life amongst the humans and has basically just decided that this is what she's going to do. This is where she's going to live. She has a job. She grew up with a foster sister in the human world, and this is how she is going to live the rest of her life. Little does she know that her father, the highest member of the vampire councilman, has a different idea for the rest of her life, and that is an arranged marriage to keep a centuries-long treaty with the werewolves that live in this world. So this was a really cool story because it involved many different aspects. So you had humans, you had vampires, and you have werewolves, and there is a different dynamic between each one of these species. So the humans and the vampires have always kind of had this good political treaty. The humans and the werewolves don't necessarily get along, but they're fine. And then the werewolves and the vampires absolutely hate each other. They can't stand each other. They have to have these very specific treaties to ensure that neither one of these species causes harm to the other. And Misery getting married to the alpha of this werewolf pack is going to help keep this treaty. So as you can imagine, this is an enemies to lovers romance because not only are they just coming from different worlds, they are different species and now having to be married and living together. So Misery enters this very dangerous situation because she is a vampire who is like absolutely hated by the werewolves, and now she is living with them in their house and around this entire pack of werewolves. So in my opinion, it was a really, really cool dynamic. I liked that there was a enemies to lovers between two different species, so it's almost like an amplified enemies to lovers setting. There was also a mystery aspect of the story as well, so Misery is trying to solve this mystery, and her new husband, Lo, gets involved in this as well, and they kind of start to, over time, work together to try to solve this main mystery that is happening in the book, and also keep peace between all of these different species in the world. I did really like it. Again, it wasn't necessarily my favorite Ali Hazelwood book, but I did like that it was still a romance-based book and also had something else going on in the plot as well. I actually really liked Misery as her FMC in this book because she was very standoffish in the beginning, and Lo, the alpha werewolf of this pack, is very, I wouldn't say emotional is the right word, but he's very open and very connected to people. And that was really cool to see too. So where the vampires are quite literally cold and standoffish and push people away from them, the vampires run in packs. They are very open and talk to each other and they communicate all the time. And there's always something going on with them as a group. And it was really cool to see Misery learn how to live amongst a group setting like that and also kind of find where she fit in the world as well. So there was a lot to the plot that you wouldn't see in a typical Ali Hazelwood book because you are now watching this female character try to find her place. And I did really like that. I liked Misery in general, and I liked watching her develop as a character. But if you do like Ali Hazelwood, you know you like her writing already, I would highly suggest reading this one as well. And last but not least, for the month of March, I read If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, and this was a 4-star rating for me. This is a contemporary fiction novel that follows 4 young women that live in Seoul, Korea, and the impossible beauty standards that are set in this way of life. First of all, let me just throw a disclaimer out there. I don't know mass amounts about Korean culture, and I'm not going to pretend like I do. However, I have heard of some things, such as what beauty means to a lot of those that live in Korea. This was such a gripping story because it felt like just reading the story of 4 women. And it was both gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, and I don't know. This book, this was another one. It took me by complete surprise. Watching what these women go through to try to constantly change themselves to look better, to be better looking for other people, to get further in life, to get more money, to get further in jobs, to get further in careers, was like so eye-opening. I felt like the writing itself was very immersive. Again, I just felt like I was reading the story of like four girlfriends, like four friends that I've maybe gone out to dinner with, and they're just telling me what their life was like when they lived in Seoul. And I just, yeah, I don't know. This one just took me by surprise. It is, I will say there's some trigger warnings in this book as well. A lot of graphic talk about plastic surgery, a lot of talk about semi-sex work, because some of these women, what they do for work is kind of borderline sex work. So this was just a very eye-opening story for me, watching these four women kind of like, and they're all intermingled, they're all intertwined. Some of them are friends and some of them just live close together, some of them work together. But watching them deal with the standards that are set for them, not just the beauty standards, but also the standards that came from their family and the expectations that came from their families as well. It was just really gripping, and I truly enjoyed it. I saw this mentioned in one of Carrie Can Read's videos and one of her wrap-ups, I believe, and as soon as she went into describing it, I was like, I have to grab that book and read it. And I liked that it was set in like a contemporary setting. Like, this is Seoul, Korea now, and she was saying even in her video that it was like down the street from her, like she knew exactly where this was taking place. So I believe this was a debut novel by this author, and she just knocked it out of the park with this very, very, like I said, very immersive writing. I really enjoyed it. I will continue to buy everything that she writes from here on out. All right, friends, well, there you have it. That is everything that I read in the month of March. That was 8 books total, I believe, and what a great month. I don't think anything was below 3.5 stars, which for me is a really good month. No DNFs. I truly enjoyed every story that I read, and I'm a little nervous about matching this month for the rest of the year, because that was a great reading month for me. I would love to know if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts and opinions on those books were, or was there anything that you read in the month of March that you think I should add to my upcoming TBR? Drop that in a comment below. As always, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button because it always helps a girl out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my other upcoming videos, like my monthly wrap-ups, my TBR videos, or my vlogs that I release on a weekly basis, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. As always, it has been an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.